Hello, my name is Olurotimi Osha. I like to talk about history and history of the world generally. If you don't study history like I do, you don't know what you're missing. Today, of course, I'm going to be answering the question, are Afghans Iranians? Well, let me start off with answering, um, were Afghans Iranians? Were Afghans Iranians? The answer to that is yes. So Afghans historically were known as Iranians. I've done an earlier video in which I mentioned how the term Iran, of course, is an endonym. So the people within, the area of Iran, and of course, um, uh, it's adjacent, uh, extant adjacent neighbors, right, which have formed various uh, distinct nations, like Azerbaijanis. They used to be in Afghanistan. Of course, they all used to be part of the greater Persian empires, from the Achaemenids, right, the Achaemenid Empire, ancient empires, the Sasanian empires, the Safavid Empire. Now, the distinction came when the at the end of the Safavid uh, Empire, towards the Safavids. I think they ruled between 1501 and 1736. They were the Safavid Persian Empire, right? They're Persian speaking, and they were the ones who established, of course, Shia Islam. That's another thing that it distinguishes um, uh, modern Iran from the Afghans, right? Majority of Afghans of Afghanistan practice Sunni Islam. That is, roughly over 80% of them, right? They're still a Shia minority. Of course, the Taliban's were Sunni, right? They practice this form of Sunni Islam. So, so around the 18th century, around 1747, a guy called, with the decline of the Safavid Empire, a guy called Ahmad Shah Durrani would establish a separate, distinct empire, right? The Durrani Empire, and establish like an Afghan empire. So that was the beginning of the distinction. And of course, that was the beginning of sort of a distinct Afghan uh, uh, nationalism. But importantly, when you look at the ethnic composition of Afghanistan, um, 30% of Afghanistan people of Afghanistan are Persians. They're Persians. Now, however, in Afghanistan, even though they're Persians, they might not call themselves Persians, right? Like the Farsi people of Iran, right? Or Fars, of Pars, as they call themselves, Persians. So they are East Persians, right? They're known as East Persians, but they go by Tajiki, right? They're Tajiks. And the reason I know this, apart from my studies, is because of I don't know if she's a social media influencer, but I follow her. She's from Afghanistan and she calls herself Persian as well. And she elaborates and explains. Her name's Shabnam Nasimi. So she's from Afghanistan, but she's Persian as well, right? And for someone like me who is from Nigeria, and I'm Yoruba, and even within Yoruba, they're different dialects, right? And even though we're all Yorubas and we have different dialects, I'm able to understand that. So the people of Afghanistan, interestingly, the majority, their official language is actually Persian. It's Persian, but the endonym that's used there is Dari, right? Dari. Dari, again, an endonym, that's a language, that's what people internal, right, to a region call themselves, right? So it's a dialect of Persian, right? And it's called Dari. Apparently, Dari means court language because Persian used to be the language of the courts, language of administration, right? Language of government. Prior to the advent of the British, in the Middle Ages, right? Persian for a long time, ancient and then Middle Ages, uh, Persian was a language of the courts, including as far as regions like India. So prior to the British arriving. Now, so these gradual distinctions between Persian and Afghanistan, the Afghanistan nationalism, it started to become more distinct in the 19th century, right? When British and Russian empires had sort of a clash, and they made the area of Iran, right? Iran, and they sort of started balkanizing the area of Iran. We call it Iran today. Iran is now a nation state, but it wasn't known as Iran as a political entity, right? Iran was just something that the people of the area called themselves, including people from Afghanistan. So these new distinct nation states arose with some sort of balkanization between the Russian Empire and the British Empire, because the British Empire, from about 1858, 1857 to 1858, they had an interest in um, their their British Raj in India, the Indian Empire, right? For many who don't know, the Queen of England, Queen Victoria, was actually Empress of India, right? So the British Raj, or the Crown Rule in India, as it was called, so it was the richest of the colonies of England. And Great Britain started to exert direct rule, direct control over over India from about 1858, right? And so interestingly, they tried to conquer Afghanistan, right? But they couldn't. But there was a balkanization, right? They couldn't, but they did exert political influence. So the main thing was they made that area, region of Iran, Afghanistan, those regions, they made it a buffer zone. Uh, so Russia and England, they sandwiched Iran, Afghanistan, those regions, dividing them. And that was when Afghanistani nationalism, grew more. And then by 1919, they got it complete political independence from Great Britain. Great Britain never could conquer them directly, right? Couldn't colonize them directly, but they exerted a sphere of influence over them. Again, so the Afghanistani people, they're called Afghans. So they're essentially Iranians as well, right? So that same spirit, they've been part of the same empires, the ancient empires, the civilization, and importantly, they uh, I did an earlier video talking about the Khorasan. You know, Iranians call it, Persians call it Khorasan, right? But from the way we spell it in English, Khorasan. I guess I'll call it Khorasan. It sounds good the way Iranians call it, Khorasan. So that area, that region, Afghanistan was part of that Khorasan culture, and it's very significant in Persian Iranian history. Khorasan had been a capital from where the Parthians, right, which the Romans wrote a lot about, from where the Parthians emerged. Of course, they established other capitals like in Ctesiphon and different other places. But Khorasan, that culture is very significant, and Afghanistan is pretty much part of it. Now, in terms of the language, like I said, um, the majority language, official language of Afghanistan is actually Persian, right? It's Persian, even though in uh, their province, their region, they call it Dari, but it's actually the Persian language, right? So when a Persian is speaking Iranian, somebody in Iran is speaking Persian, speaking Farsi, and then in Afghanistan they're speaking Dari. They also call it Tajik. Again, the Tajik people are the Persians as well, right? They're East Persians. When they're speaking, apparently they're speaking the same language. So the distinction is like British English versus American English. So it's highly mutually intelligible, right? They understand one another. And I can understand this as well because I'm Yoruba in Nigeria and they're Yorubas in Togo, in Benin, and we understand each other, right? It's the same language. Distinction is in tone, in intonation, the pronunciation, the accents. I think they sound funny when they're talking, and I'm sure they think I sound funny when I'm talking. So they have a different accent, right? But we are speaking the same thing. We understand each other. It's the same language. So that's the same thing with the Afghans and the Persians. Um, so that language is the same. They made it official, Dari official in 1964 as the official language. Now, the Persians in Afghanistan, 30% of the population of Afghanistan, while um, while the majority ethnic group in Afghanistan is Pashtun or Pathan, right? They're also an Iranic people, right? They're East Iranians, right? They're Pashtun or Patun, right? So they also have them in Iran, right? They occupy northeastern Iran. So but they're the majority in Afghanistan. They're known as an East Iranian people. So basically their cultures are similar. Remember, Iran today, 61% are Persian, are Farsi. Persian is their official language, right? Everybody basically can speak Persian, mostly because it's an official language. The Persian is 61% of Iran. And there are many different groups as well, ethnic groups. There the uh, Azerbaijani, many different ethnic groups. So similar in Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, the Persians, as Iranian people, Persians are 30%. Again, Afghans would have been referred to as Iranians, like historically, right? So the term Iran, again, was an endonym that the people of that region used to identify themselves. But now, of course, with modern polities and nation states, um, nations have adapted new names, right? It's just like Nigeria, right? I'm originally from Nigeria. Nigeria is a name we continue to use, even though that's not what we called ourselves. The British, called it Nigeria. Since we got our independence, we continue to refer to it as Nigeria. Ghana used to be called Gold Coast by the British when they colonized, but they changed their name and decided to call themselves Ghana, right? So nations use different, uh, in the modern era, nations from 20th century, nations started to adapt different names and to identify themselves nationally and as a political entity. So yeah, uh, pretty much. And as I said, the Pathans or Pashtuns, an Iranic people, East Iranic people, and they constitute 42% of modern Afghanistan, while the Persians or Tajiki, they're also Persian people. They're East Persians. They constitute 30%. So that's it. The other major thing that distinguishes them is that that's Iran from Afghanistan is religion. Of course, we know the majority uh, religion in Iran is Shia, right? Shia Muslims, while in Afghanistan, roughly over 80% practice Sunni Islam. So there you have it. I will keep you posted. Thank you.